This Hangout and airs live, week 12, here, footballguys.com. Dr. Gene Bramble, Matt Waldman, and we're coming out of our Thanksgiving hibernation, our slumber. If the last night game of the night really was kind of at least the Vikings and the Lions woke us up. We're waking up to a very interesting week 12. And Gene, we have some things that we're going to be tuning into in some situations. If you did tune out after Thanksgiving, the change on Friday, first and foremost, Tennessee going to Indianapolis, maybe without the services of Rashard Matthews. We should get some clarity, but based on what you know, what do you expect to hear about him in a few hours here?
We didn't get any clarity overnight. I think Richard Matthews is important enough that Ian Rappaport and Adam Schefter, is expecting something from them overnight Saturday into Sunday morning, and we haven't heard anything yet. Matthews left Thursday's practice with a hamstring injury. They decided to treat instead of practice on Friday. Malarkey called it a day of rest, but also said that they wanted to see how he felt on Saturday, which is a little bit different than the we'll work him out on Sunday morning at game day and see how he looks situation. They wanted to know how he felt on Saturday after not practicing on Friday, which either says they had planned all along that it wasn't a big deal and he's going to play on Sunday, which I think is unlikely. Or two, they knew when he came in on Friday that he wasn't right, and they really wanted to have a sense of, do we need to switch the game plan around on Saturday? Do we need to make a change? Because Matthews isn't going to be able to go. And then we didn't hear anything overnight. And usually most of what those guys have been reporting overnight on Saturday is such and such was a concern in practice, but is expected to play. And that hasn't been the case with Matthews. So the other thing about Tennessee is they activated Harry Douglas, which possibly they were going to do to the 53-man roster anyway, but it looks even a little bit more suspicious when they activate him with only 1 week of practice with Matthews' injury. So I don't know. It's going to go down to a game time decision. I haven't seen anything yet through pregame warmups this morning from the local writers that suggest whether he's going to go or not. Tennessee is usually pretty good about doing that, so I think we're going to have a pretty good sense here soon. But as of right now, it's very much still up in the air.
Matt, we know that Indy is one of the best matchups to target every week in the passing game. If we see Matthews active, is that enough to keep him in lineups despite the risk? And if he's not active, who's the main winner here? Is it Corey Davis? Is it finally Eric Decker week? Is it just more Delaney Walker? What do we expect based on the fork in the road we're at with Rashard Matthews this morning?
Yeah, I mean, when you take a look at the matchups and how Indianapolis has given up points in the past, you can start with the last Colts-Titans matchup, and that's where Eric Decker had 7 for 88. Matthews had 4 for 69, and Taywan Taylor had 2 for 61 and a touchdown. At that game, Delaney Walker only had 17 yards, and he was targeted 8 times and only caught 4 of those balls. And that was a few weeks ago when he was really hurt a little bit. I believe he was dealing with an injury at that point. But when you look at the Colts versus tight ends in games either before and after that, you see that George Kittle had 7 for 83 and a touchdown. You see 5 for 46 from Tyler Kroft, 4 for 44 for Steven Anderson. Even Vance McDonald had a touchdown. David Njoku had a touchdown. They don't give up a lot in yardage usually, but they do tend to be pretty good in the red zone in terms of being charitable. So I would say that a healthier Delaney Walker and a Delaney Walker they're going to have to rely upon is probably still a decent bet unless you just have an absolutely great matchup for tight ends. And that means to me that probably Decker is going to be your guy. I think Decker and then Corey Davis will probably be second in that pecking order. My only thing with Davis is that his route running hasn't been as sharp as it needs to be. And some of the mistakes that have been made that have resulted in interceptions are a combination of his lack of clarity with route running and some of Marcus Mariota's decisions under pressure, or just in general, going to that next read. So, I think Decker's the safest play, and Davis is kind of more of who else do you have type of player that you would weigh against in terms of making a starting decision.
What about when we go elsewhere in the Tennessee offense, which is still not clicking, not to the level it was at its height, which is a good 2-month height last year. If you're on the fence between Mariota and another quarterback, does the Rashard Matthews status matter? Do we have clarity on Mariota? Not health clarity, but fantasy value clarity.
I think he's also a guy that you probably played some of the matchups too. But I would say that all in all, he has enough weapons to probably click in this game. So unless you just have an absolute stud, who's, if you have Mariota and an absolute stud, you're never starting Mariota anyway.
Right.
So I would say, yeah, you're probably going to start Mariota this week.
On the other side, it might be playing with fire, but do you try to time the T.Y. Hilton week? This is an indoor game. It is a good matchup. Jacoby Brissett, Gene out of concussion protocol, good to go today?
Yeah, he's going to play. Shouldn't be an issue.
So what do we think, Matt? Is this the week that you go down with the ship, check into the Hilton?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a T.Y. Hilton week for sure. And I think the reason being is that when you look at just how the Tennessee Titans have played wide receivers, you look at the type of wide receivers they've given yards up to. Antonio Brown, small, quick wide receiver who will win the ball in the air and get yards after the catch. AJ Green, he'll get yards after the catch. He can win the ball in the air. He's a deep threat. Jeremy Maclin, not even as good as T.Y. Hilton, but a similar type of player, just a little bit larger. We can go in, when you go in those types of directions, you start to see, T.Y. Hilton went 1 for 19 in the last matchup. Fine. Jacoby Brissett, he's still learning the offense. I would look at this and say Jacoby Brissett's has things a little bit more figured out in this particular game. So to me, I would definitely roll with Hilton, and I feel comfortable about it.
Yeah, this is a week that you risk the 2 for 19, the 1 for 15. It's been the good games have been at home against Cleveland and San Francisco, and on the road against Houston, but in those very ideal, comfy confines. And I would expect it to be a game where Brissett's going to take some deep shots. Maybe not a lot of deep shots in Carolina and the Jets this week, Gene, but a couple of situations we have to look at. On the Carolina side, Greg Olsen's back, half of the snaps. Give us an idea of how effective you would expect him to be based on the injury he's been out and how long he's been out.
I think he can be affected. The question is going to be what kind of volume he gets. And Ron Rivera has said they want to save him from himself and save him from us, which means somebody has told them that they probably ought not to overuse him yet and that maybe his conditioning isn't quite there, which is another thing that Rivera said. Whether that's accurate or not is hard to know. I don't think you can take the half of the snaps as any sort of gospel according to Rivera as far as what they're going to do with Olsen today. But I do think you're going to see with Olsen the same thing that we've said with players returning from injury who are limited with an injury, which Olsen really shouldn't be, but the conditioning is an issue, is that he's going to be put in situations where he can be successful. And that's going to be red zone. That's going to be certain personnel packages, which is what Rivera hinted at when Adam Schefter and Rappaport, both those guys reported it today. So I think you can probably guess 25 to 40 snaps. Rivera said there was no chance that it would be 60. It's going to be certain personnel packages, and he's going to have a chance to perform. I don't know that you're going to get 6 to 8 targets from Olsen today, but I would think you're going to get 3 to 5, and there's a good chance he could get 3 or 4 or more catches, and those are going to be in spots where he can be productive. I don't think it's enough to put him up in Travis Kelce range as far as expectation goes yet, but there is a chance that he can hit his ceiling expectation today as far as touchdowns go. But I don't think you're going to see an 8 for 80 day from Olsen today.
Well, Matt, maybe not an 8 for 80, but if Olsen is your other choice with, say, Jared Cook or Jack Doyle in the game we just talked about, up and down guys, maybe not the highest ceiling, although Doyle earlier in the season did. Are you going back to Olsen right away, or are you erring on the side of caution here?
I'm erring on the side of caution because Cook's got the Broncos and their swinging gate, and you also have the Titans, who are also very charitable. They're kind of the home for wayward tight ends when it comes to fantasy points. And I was going to say, I think Gene's got it dead on, because I was thinking 4 to 6 targets at most for for Olsen. And when you look at that range of what the Jets have given up, Austin Hooper 4 for 47 and a touchdown, Nick O'Leary 4 for 51, Julius Thomas 3 for 58. I think that's kind of the range that you're hoping for out of a guy who's only going to get a fraction of the snaps that he would normally get, whatever that fraction is, whether it's 7/8 or 3/8. You're going to see that kind of a range at best from him. And how often are you going to see him stretch the field? Are they going to target the deep seam, or are they going to what are the type of routes that they're going to use him, knowing that they want to make sure that they monitor how he does? So there's a lot of that involved in there. So if you have clearly a great matchup with a decent tight end who's often a part of the equation, go with that. If you're scratching the bottom of the barrel with guys who drop the football, or some guy who started to recently get playing time that you're not quite sure about, then I would go with Greg Olsen, because he's going to be the safer bet, even if it's at a lower volume.
Well, since you brought him up, what about somebody like, is Austin Hooper bottom of the barrel at this point? Is maybe not bottom of the barrel, but certainly down in the stuff that sloshes around down there because of the Bucs offense. On the other side of the matchup, OJ Howard. How far down our list are we going? Basically, once you get past the semi-established guys like Doyle and Cook, is it Olsen, or really, if you have anybody with a pulse, you're going to wait on Olsen?
I think that Hooper's a good example of the bottom of the barrel, because Steve Sarkisian seems to have stuck him there at the bottom of the bottle, kind of like the worm in the bottom of the bottle. So I think that's kind of where Austin Hooper has been. When he actually pours him out and uses him, it turns out pretty well. But at this stage, he belongs at that range. I'd say a guy like Adam Shaheen, I would probably use Adam Shaheen over Greg Olsen. Ricky Seals-Jones, bad matchup, even though he's an interesting player. I'd probably use Jones over Seals-Jones. I'd use Olsen over Seals-Jones. So that's kind of the range I'm looking at there.
Gene, we're not exactly looking to the Jets offense for fantasy production, but just in case the coaches decide to kiss and make up with Bilal Powell and maybe start using him more down the stretch, coming out of the bye, we had this knee issue. He got in one limited practice. Do you think that it means we're going to see Forte today, or are we going to see him next week?
Not yet. I think next week is likely. I think what they did this week was put him out there on Friday, see how his knee responded to a little bit extra work through the next couple of days. They'll likely have him do some things on Monday and Tuesday, and then we'll see whether he's practicing on Wednesday. If he is, then I think we're probably going to see him next week. There was a little bit of door open for Forte. I think it was Schefter that reported this morning that they were at least going to give him a chance to play. But with one limited practice, he hasn't done anything since the Thursday night game in week 7. I can't remember which one it was, but it's probably 9. It's been 3 weeks since he's done anything, practice or play, until Friday. And you just don't do one limited practice in a situation where you've had knee soreness. The conditioning isn't there yet. It's really, even though they listed him, I think he's questionable, as the Jets like to do. There's really no chance that he's playing. I think he's going to be inactive, and then we see what happens on Wednesday, Thursday next week.
Matt, you brought up Adam Shaheen, who looked massive. It's amazing that a guy that looked massive, Ashland, can still look massive in the NFL. He's going to Philadelphia, and nothing big on the injury front to look at there. But on one hand, we have the same Philly offense for fantasy that we had last year, because we've got 8, 9 players touching the ball every week, which is great for their offense. It's great for Carson Wentz. It's not great for fantasy clarity. Do we have clarity now that Alshon Jeffrey is an every week play after that outstanding play he made last Sunday night, and how he seems to be over this ankle issue? He seems, against his old team, to be settling in as the number one. We know we have clarity with Zach Ertz. Is there anybody else in the Philly offense, in the backfield, among those wide receivers, the secondary wide receivers? Nelson Aguilar looked like we could trust him. Do you like anybody in the Philly offense outside of Jeffrey and Ertz against Chicago today?
I mean, I think that you have to look at the running backs, and when you look at how the Bears have given up points to running backs, it seems to be with teams that have, tend to have a committee of some sort, and you can see games where guys have had decent days, but not spectacular. And really, that's kind of what happens with the Bears, is that they're pretty good against the run. So I think from a running back standpoint, you're kind of hoping for. I think what will probably happen there is you're praying for is probably going to be a Jay day, and it's going to be kind of your 40-degree day type of situation. It's not going to be a great scenario. You're probably looking at somewhere between 50 to 70 yards at best, and all that may come on one run. And then it's like, well, do I have Blunt? Blunt could be good too, but I think he's your least likely candidate at this stage. Corey Clement might have a better shot at getting red zone touches, because that's basically where they put him. They like to use him on passing downs in the red zone or on running downs in the red zone. And unless it's a goal line situation, they put Blunt in sometimes there. But from the 20 and in, Corey Clement gets a lot of those snaps. So he's the guy that I might take a look at. In the passing game, I mean, it's similar. You look at also what the Bears have given up, and it tends to be basically one good day for someone and then a bunch of 40-degree days for everybody else. So to me, unless you're just like, I need some points, you can put in Nelson Aguilar and hope, or the second tight end and maybe hope. But I think that really, when it comes down to it, Jeffrey and Ertz are really the only two guys that I'd trust on a really strong level this week.
Yeah, and the Bears defense being competitive week to week doesn't help the Philly offense as a week to nudge your Eagles into the lineup. Maybe next week when they go to Seattle, that's going to be a fun one to watch. Gene, I don't know if it's going to be that much fun to watch New England and Miami, but I want to ask you about Tom Brady, because at the end of the year, we always hear that he was playing with 3 or 4 injuries, but now we're hearing during the season, and Dr. David Chow, who's doing some great work, the San Diego Union Tribune with Kevin Acey and doing great stuff on Twitter. I saw him tweet out, I think earlier in the week, Tom Brady in no danger of an Achilles tear. Like, whoa, wait, I wasn't thinking about Tom Brady being in danger of an Achilles tear. Should this be on our radar, just watching him play? Could this be one of those issues that, he goes out today and maybe only throws 25 passes for 200 yards, and we think, well, it's because of the game plan and running backs, but we could see that this issue is going to affect him more than they're letting on?
I think the issue with no risk of Achilles tear is because we all just saw Richard Sherman fight through weeks and weeks of being listed on the injury report with an Achilles injury, and then tear the Achilles in a nationally televised game, and then have replay after replay after replay of him talking to his teammates along the way. And so there was an undercurrent of concern: is every player that has Achilles tendonitis or a little bit of soreness there at risk of a tear? And the answer to that is yes. There's a little bit higher risk of injury there, just like there is anywhere else, when there's already a body part that's inflamed. And that there's compensatory mechanisms and everything else. But no, I think that maybe he's at a slightly higher risk than the general football population of having an Achilles wrist today. But this is the same thing I say about trying to assign percentage chances of injury at one play, one game, one season. It's very difficult to do that. So I think that was more of a reassurance thing on his part than trying to assess a true risk to the situation. But this is different than a pocket quarterback with a hamstring injury, or a pocket quarterback with or any sort of soft tissue thing. There is going to be some Achilles soreness when you get back to the time. We don't know, I don't think, which foot this is. But when you get back to the top of the drop, you have your foot in a position where the Achilles is going to be stressed. And then when you hitch and move up in the pocket, as Tom Brady does when he goes through his progressions all the time, if you want to look at a quarterback that hitches and bounces, Tom Brady is the top of the list, because he's doing this on 45 plays every game, and he does it so well. So there is going to be some limitation there if the Achilles is really bothering. However, New England, more so than any other team in the league, just lists guys that have any issue at all as limited and puts them on the injury report as questionable, especially those players who don't practice earlier in the week. So Brady didn't practice on Wednesday, but by Friday wasn't listed on the injury report at all. He isn't on the game status report as questionable at all. And he told reporters that he didn't have any concern. So, yeah, there could be some accuracy issues, or maybe they limit a little bit of what he can do if the game is well in hand. And instead of, what Belichick likes to do, whatever the game plan is, it doesn't matter if it's 40-0 or 3-0, he's running the game plan. Brady will throw through the fourth quarter, regardless of what the score is. Maybe that's a little bit different today, but I wouldn't fear him too much. And I think I think what I wrote is that the risk of catastrophic injuries today is really low for him.
And what about in this scenario, as you often have to do, Gene, solve for X when it comes to the Patriots injuries? Solve for X being Chris Hogan's shoulder injury. We didn't know specifics, but now we've seen how long he's been out. The question for fantasy football is, do we start thinking about dropping him because of how long this has gone on?
I don't think so. I think this is, assuming that what it is an AC sprain, it's one of those things where until the strength and range of motion is back, they're not going to let him do all that much. And yeah, sometimes you hope that it's a 1 to 2 week injury, as it was for Golden Tate, even though it was said to be a few weeks, and other players over the years. But in Hogan's case, it clearly wasn't, because they still had him in a sling 10 days after the injury. So you knew this was going to be a longer term deal. However, when he gets back to practice, he should be able to return fairly quickly. Conditioning is not necessarily going to be an issue. They're waiting on strength, range of motion, the ability to play the position. So that could be next week. Maybe we see him practice on Wednesday, and we're talking about him being a game time decision in week 13. But I think that we're getting closer to the point where you would expect that to happen. That's assuming that the reports that we got from Ian Rappaport and others that that it was a shoulder sprain is accurate, and there's not something more going on there. And even if there is, because they haven't put him on injured reserve, there hasn't been a discussion of surgery, really shouldn't be something that would keep him out for the rest of the year. So I think we're closer now to getting him back than we were last week and the week before. I think it's coming soon. I wouldn't drop him.
Matt, get out your Patriots backfield decoder ring, hold it up against this week's game. What does it spell it out? What does it say?
Yeah, well, Miami's a 4-3 defense. So you're probably going to see again, at this stage, you're probably going to see Dion Lewis running zone. And I think that Lewis is probably going to be your guy here. And this is a team that's kind of tough against the run. They still have some decent players there. But if you can get enough volume going on them, you're usually doing reasonably well. And really, more than anything, though, it's also about who does well in the passing game, because these linebackers, could we have a new name for a linebacker who can't cover? Because linebackers need to be able to tackle and be able to defend the run and cover the pass. And I don't know if they're full-fledged linebackers. At least Kiko Alonso is not, because that guy gets beat, by tight ends and running backs with ease. He just looks like he doesn't even know what to do half the time. It's kind of crazy. So when you watch that, to me today, all I can think of is Gronk. When I watch the Miami defense, and then it's going to be Gronk and the primary receiver, because every primary receiver has had a decent day against the Miami Dolphins, even if nobody else has. So it's Cooks, Gronk, and then probably you probably roll with Dion Lewis and James White, and I think those are the two guys that you hope for, unless Burkhead, and his fumbling issues keeps him out of the doghouse. And that's kind of where the mystery comes in, is the mystery meat back on the menu, or is, or are we just going to roll with the same, or is Dion Lewis the square pizza that everybody liked at the lunchroom table? So I think that's basically where we're rolling there, is Lewis, Cook, and Gronk.
Yeah, Miami linebackers looking like the old electric football. You just turn on, they vibrate and just kind of go in one direction on the field.
He's like, I guess Kiko Alonso is kind of like that old vibrating exercise machine. You may not really get any. Well, you might get some benefit out of it. I don't know, but probably not us.
Gene, are we going to be having Jalen Ramsey consulting him for injury information in the future? What happened here is he said he was out. He travels to Arizona. Now he's going to play.
Yeah, he was just having fun. So something didn't add up there. For him to, quote, jam his hand in practice and be telling reporters he was ruled out within hours suggests that he had a broken hand or something else along those lines. But there weren't any reports of a cast. There was a camera picture on Twitter yesterday where he was hiding his hand. But they listed him questionable. They allowed him to travel. That doesn't sound like a player that has a major hand injury. Defensive guys play with hand stuff all the time. Ramsey has been playing through knee and groin stuff all year long. So he was just having a little bit of fun. And it was good to see that because it really sounded ominous if the player is saying he can't go within hours after suffering a hand injury. It almost had to have been because they saw something on an x-ray or he had a dislocation or something else like that. So that's not the case. He traveled with the team. He's going to play.
What about Leonard Fournette? Now he's going to play, but we heard last week this is going to be an issue all year.
Limited and then he played 52 snaps and took 20 carries and had over 30 touches, which was his highest workload of the season. So, yes, I think there's an undercurrent of concern with Fournette because everybody wants to, and maybe there is something to this. I don't, there's no way I'm going to know of, does he really love to play football or is he going to play in the cold or all those sorts of things? Why didn't he play at LSU over the last 4 to 6 weeks of last year? And everybody wants to ascribe every time Fournette misses something to, he doesn't really want to play. So why would he go? And I think that, earlier in the season, last week, it was easier to have some concern about Fournette because they did rest him through a week in practice after they thought he was going to play. And then they did sit him out. And then there was some concern, well, it's just Cleveland. Do we need to be worried about it? But, they limited him a little bit this week, but he practiced on Wednesday after those 30 touches and 52 snaps. TJ Yeldon and Chris Ivory maybe with an illness, didn't look great last week. The Jaguars, when they have activated Fournette, have shown zero interest in limiting him at all, except on that one occasion where he had a little bit of an ankle injury late in the fourth quarter. And then they cleared him to come back that day anyway, if he could have. So if he is active, I think you have to assume that he's going to get more than 20 touches. Is he going to get 25 to 30 today? I don't know. There were 11 carries that went to Ivory and Yeldon last week, so the percentage was still there, where maybe he didn't take 90% of the touches last week. But if he's active, I don't see any reason to expect that he won't go. And he wasn't listed on the game status report after all those limited practices, so every expectation should be that he's going to play and see his usual heavy workload.
Matt, trust big when we're setting our lineups now, week 12, some leagues, this is the week that sets the playoff brackets. Some leagues, it's next week. I trust Larry Fitzgerald. I don't know if I trust Blaine Gabbert. And Blaine Gabbert has to be able to do his job for Larry Fitzgerald to matter for fantasy football. Maybe if Jalen Ramsey was out, then it made us a little more optimistic that there would be some things that would work in the passing game with Larry Fitzgerald. Do you break ties with Fitzgerald in favor of it's Larry Fitzgerald, or do you break ties with Larry Fitzgerald in favor of it's Blaine Gabbert against Jacksonville?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that when you kind of look at it from this standpoint, I think it's kind of a mix of Blaine Gabbert versus Jacksonville, and it's Larry Fitzgerald. The Larry Fitzgerald, you've got to knock him down a tier because it's Blaine Gabbert. I think that's the way that you look at it. So instead of being a wide receiver 1, he's a wide receiver 2 with probably more wide receiver 3 likelihood at this stage. And then everybody else is kind of a crapshoot because Gabbert's going to deal with a lot of pressure this week. Yeah, unless they can successfully run Adrian Peterson 20 to 25 times, unless they can do that against this defense and get them off to a hot start early. And it's possible because when you look at the Jaguars, again, Bilal Powell, 21 for 163, Todd Gurley, 23 for 116, 14 for 92 for Derrick Henry, 9 for 82 for Alex Collins. It means that what happens here, from what I've seen of the Jaguars defense on film, and when I look back at these game logs, what it means is this. In order for you to establish the run and get volume against the Jaguars, they need to be undisciplined early on so that you can break a big honking play against them. It needs to, and the backs who've been successful have broken a long run against them, and usually early in the game. So Peterson has to get hot early. Can he do that? He can break several 15 to 20 yard runs when he's going well, but I haven't seen the breakaway speed from him yet. I saw one play against where he had his high all-time high workload, and to be fair, it was at the end of the game where he tried to get around to the left sideline and he just did not have the second gear to pull away from a safety. and you were like, that's what's missing from Adrian Peterson now. Even though the single, double, triple kind of speed is still there, the home run speed is not. So looking at this, the odds are low that you're going to get a big day from Adrian Peterson, which means that Blaine Gabbert's not going to be very comfortable, and you're probably going to get maybe one fluke type of good play for somebody other than Larry Fitzgerald, and Fitzgerald's going to give you a 40-degree day.
Yeah, Chad Williams. It is that 40-degree day part of the calendar now. So I think, lots and lots of 40-degree days. Really quickly, Gene, I want to ask you about the Jacksonville defense. Based on what we've seen this year, are we in the Broncos Super Bowl winning defense, Ravens Super Bowl winning defense vicinity, or is this a question? Is this another case of me getting a little overexcited?
Probably a little overexcited. I would like to see them have just a little bit better linebacker play so that you're certain that if they face an offensive line that can at least even out the defensive line, that you've got the linebackers there. I like Telvin Smith, Paul Bus, Leslie, Miles Jack. The talent is there, but I don't know that there's a game changer necessarily in the mix. But they're healthy, which is more important than anything else right now. If they can continue to stay this healthy and they don't lose Campbell, so many of these other guys, then I think you've got a defense that can win the Super Bowl. I don't think there's Saxonville notwithstanding. I think that's a sum better than the parts type of situation. You love Calais Campbell, you love Dante Fowler, and what they're doing up front with Darius as well. But I don't know that it's such an overwhelming situation where you're seeing Von Miller and DeMarcus Ware, or you're seeing Terrell Suggs and all of his counterparts from Elvis Dumerville to Adalius Thomas to everybody else over the years. There's no Ray Lewis, there's no Ed Reed, there's not that caliber of player there yet, I don't think. Now maybe we look back in a couple of years and say Jalen Ramsey was that guy, or Dante Fowler has become that guy, or something like that. But I don't know that we're quite there yet.
It's going to be fun to see. I hope that the Jags can get to the playoffs at least, and maybe not face Pittsburgh again after what happened, but it'd be fun to see what they would do in Foxborough. Let's go on. Since I brought up the Steelers, Gene, Juju Smith-Schuster was ruled out really early this week, and that's going to affect Martavis Bryant decisions in our lineups and just the general complexion of this offense. Should we pencil in Smith-Schuster for a multi-week absence because he was out so early for a Sunday night game?
Possibly. I don't think we've heard anything from Pittsburgh that's helpful there yet. Smith-Schuster tweeted that he'd be back soon. Again, you can't take much from that. But I think you can be hopeful that it was a one-week thing and that we'll see him back next week. And the Steelers, especially with rookies, are really reluctant to activate players if they're not doing much in practice by Thursday. So once he didn't practice Wednesday night and they knew he wasn't going to do much on Thursday, there was no chance of him practicing on Friday anyway. So we could easily see him just miss 1 week, come back to practice Wednesday, and then do fine through next week and beyond. But Mike Tomlin may give us an indication today or maybe in his Monday press conference, but I think Wednesday is really going to tell us the tale. If he's doing something on Wednesday in practice, we'll get him back. If not, it could be a 2 to 4 week thing.
And of course, for years, Gene, when we watch the Steelers, when we watch any games at Heinz Field, the best hair, my hair's not great, the best hair in the NFL, Troy Polamalu. I mean, obviously. I mean, maybe the best hair in the NFL, maybe top 3, top 5 all time. I don't know if Clay Matthews is top 3, top 5 all time. He's probably top 3, top 5 right now. Are we going to see these flowing locks tonight under the lights?
I had no idea where you're going with that. I guess I should have seen that coming.
Good. I need to do that more often.
With the Pittsburgh Green Bay thing tonight. Game time decision. I would think that he's not going to play. He left. He was ruled out early last week. Didn't practice at all. He's one of those players that probably doesn't have to practice to play. And as far as I know, he traveled with the team. I didn't see otherwise, so there's a chance they're probably going to work him out in the pregame. I would lean doubtful more than probable, but game time decision, and he'll be limited to probably some high leverage pass rushing snaps if he's active.
So you can see, Matt, the way these pieces come together. Steelers, home, prime time, Green Bay secondary. I think Joe Flacco completed 22 of 28 against them last week. is this all systems go for Martavis Bryant? Is this one of those cases where you might not have played Martavis Bryant all year, but if you leave him on your bench tonight, you will be sorry?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a good possibility that that's where you want to go with this, because when you look at the Green Bay defense, certainly it's a weakened unit, and you can see that as of late, you can see Ted Ginn and Michael Thomas combined for 223 yards. Golden Tate and Marvin Jones combined for 14 catches for 220 yards. Even Dontrell Inman, Josh Bellamy, and Kendall Wright combined for almost 100, for over 180 yards, nearly 190 yards. And when when you look at it from that standpoint, you have to think that this might be a night where you can go with Bryant and feel pretty darn good about it. I would say that it's worth taking the risk.
It is worth taking the risk. It should be, and I don't ever feel worried about blooming the Steelers when they're at home. It's the road games. It's a primetime game, and we'll see. We missed out on what would have been a great matchup with Aaron Rodgers against Ben Roethlisberger in primetime. I'm sure that's what they were thinking when they scheduled this one. Gene, if there were any other Packers primetime games coming up for week 16, 15, 16, 17, and there's a variable here with the playoffs, but Green Bay does get Cleveland and Tampa the next 2 weeks before Rodgers is eligible to come back. Have we learned anything in the last week that gives us a better idea of whether we're going to see Rodgers this year?
No. There was very little. 2 years ago when there was a clavicle thing, Rodgers had a weekly radio show that we always waited to see. Did he have his imaging study? Was he ready to come back? That was in a situation where he wasn't having surgery. He's throwing the ball. I don't think we're going to hear more than that. He hasn't been cleared for contact yet. I think they're going to have to start getting him ready for that. Maybe we hear a little bit more of that in the coming weeks, but I wouldn't expect to hear anything until next week at the very earliest, and it could be a week or two after that. It may go right down to the wire before we see what's going on. So, we're watching the standings. We're watching to see if they can win any games coming out here. 5-5 is keeping them in it. I think if they get one more win here, whether it's this week or next week, and they get to 6-6, maybe we start thinking about whether or not Rodgers can actually come back and try to get those last 3 games in or not.
One of the teams, if you want the chances to at least to not be affected by Green Bay's playoff eligibility, you want Atlanta to lose this week. Atlanta, Gene, facing Tampa Bay. Devontae Freeman didn't really seem like there was a chance he was going to play this week. It is the second concussion this season, this calendar year for him. What do we expect? Is this going to be a holding pattern, or have we seen some signs that this was Atlanta's plan? Because you talked earlier this year about how more and more teams are going to hold, even with the first concussion, a player out for multiple weeks this year. How scared should we be if we had Devontae Freeman and need him for the stretch run in fantasy?
I think there's a good chance he comes back next week. He was cleared to do individual drills and helmet and shoulder pads, which is essentially the last stage of the return to play protocol before he's cleared for contact. So I don't know that you'll see him fully practice on Wednesday, but I think this week was in preparation to do that next week, get him to the independent neurologist and have him cleared. I don't think there was any setback because he was limited on Thursday and then not able to progress on Friday. They didn't let him do anything for 2 weeks, so it didn't make any sense that they would go limited full clear in 48 hours when it's been 2 to 3 weeks since his injury and they hadn't cleared him to do anything up to that point that was football related. So that's the way the protocol works. They've shown us that it's 48 to 72 hours per stage with him right now, or a week to week per stage, a week without symptoms and exercise, a week without symptoms and football related activity, and then a week to really prepare to play in the game. And I think that's where we are. So it'll be a little bit of a surprise to me if he doesn't go next week. But if Tevin Coleman continues to play this well and the offense continues to click, maybe they give him a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. But it's clear that they feel like he doesn't have any, they know that he doesn't have symptoms. So they cleared him for those football related drills and pads. And the next step would logically be clear him for contact this week and allow him to play.
Interesting one next week against Minnesota. Matt, we were talking earlier about Steve Sarkisian and bottles, and I suppose watching the Falcons offense every week might drive you to drink. But we did see them get a big road win on Monday night and put some points on the board coming off a game where they had an easy time of it against Dallas. Are we going to be using our alcohol to toast Steve Sarkisian and this offense against a Tampa defense that made Matt Moore look like Dan Marino for a half last week?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think Sarkisian will end up at least not getting the wrath of Falcons fans this week, and it'll be another week where that's good. Whether or not he shows up in the playoffs against quality teams and is able to create game plans that are worth anything, that's something that fans will still probably be worried about who are diehard fans and watch the games. But those who are just enjoying the drink in the stands may not notice the difference. So I would say that at this point, yeah, I mean, you can look at Tampa Bay, and Coleman's probably going to have a good day. I think that you can expect 80 to 100 yards from him. He'll probably break one big run. He'll probably even have a big play in the passing game. You can expect Julio Jones to have a nice day. You can probably expect two receivers to have a nice day. So I would count on Mohamed Sanu and Julio Jones in that respect. And then when you look at the tight end play, you might even get a decent day out of Austin Hooper today. Just might. It just depends whether they decide that they're going to run any play action plays and throw the ball to Levine Toilolo instead and let the big lumbering log kind of roll down the hill. that is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense. They're just like a big hill that you can sled down. I think that's pretty much how they are in the passing game. So it should be very nice, and Atlanta's going to look a lot better than they even really are at this stage.
You got to watch sledding on those 40-degree days, though. It gets a little slushy.
It does.
It isn't as good. Sledding's better on a colder day. Gene, next week in Green Bay, it's going to be pretty cold. Tampa is going up there. The Bay of Pigs, as Chris Berman used to call it. Are we going to see Jameis Winston there to take advantage of that matchup?
That's a tough one. There seems to be a lot more optimism today than there was earlier in the week. I don't know if it has anything to do with that PRP injection that he got, but you always thought this was going to be in the 3 to 4 week range. He's getting there. Again, if he's healthy enough to play, they're going to let him go, but he has to be healthy enough to play. The purpose of keeping him out was to make sure that he had recovered to the point where one fall was not going to aggravate the injury, where you looked at another 2 to 3 weeks of recovery time, as we'd seen with Winston, we'd seen with Randall Cobb in the past, and a lot of the other players that I generally use as comparisons. If they clear him to throw on Wednesday, that means they're preparing him to play, because if you'll remember, when this first happened, the 2 or 3 weeks after the injury, they would not clear him to throw until Friday. So the key there is going to be, if they think he's healthy enough to throw, if they think he's healthy enough to get out there in shoulder pads, then they're preparing him to play. So we'll know. Maybe Dirk Ketter gives us an idea on Monday, but we'll have a sense Wednesday whether or not he's coming back or not.
Matt, speaking of drinking, we've got to wonder if Hugh Jackson has been drinking during the games, if it took him this long to figure out that Duke Johnson is the best offensive player on the field for the Browns. Based on this erratic nature that we've seen from Hugh Jackson with all kinds of decisions and all kinds of statements all year, do we rely on that and really rely on Duke Johnson in the matchup against Cincinnati? Or do we think that depending on what he was drinking this morning, maybe he'll forget?
I think that for him, he's overwhelmed with just the pure badness that this team is. And I don't mean that in a good way. So it's Johnson has been sporadically strong as a fantasy player all year. You've seen moments all year. So I don't think he's necessarily forgotten, as much as that it's kind of like being in an office situation where you have a couple of really good employees that you could use really well. But the rest of the employees are so dysfunctional, and your bosses are even more dysfunctional than you are, that there's always some sort of like 5-alarm fire going off, and you have to like kind of put aside what you really should be doing to handle the actual insane, stupid kind of thing that's put in front of you that really shouldn't be your deal. Or it shouldn't have to be your deal at this stage of adulthood. So I think that that's kind of what's happening with this team. But then at the same time, when you look at Cincinnati's defense, you got to understand, I mean, against the run, you better look at it this way. When the best game was Le'Veon Bell for 134 yards, and he needed 35 carries to do it, they had to basically do a forced march with Le'Veon Bell to get that much. that's a good defense. I mean, otherwise you're probably going to get, 19 for 60 to 80 yards as your result for a running game that you're committing to. So they're not really it's not a running back worth committing to, other than the fact that, again, they're not so as good against the pass with running backs. So Johnson is probably your best play for Cleveland right now, unless you can somehow magically unless your league allows magical thinking and you can get Josh Gordon's points a week early. That would be about it, because he's coming back next week, probably.
Next week, Matt, as part of the Cleveland community, the Browns community, maybe not always willingly, as
in exile, yes,
in exile, as the brain, the center of the RSP. Which college quarterback should Browns fans be watching to get excited about and then disappointed about when the Browns trade out of the number 1 pick to a team that actually sees how good the quarterback is?
None of them, to be honest with you, because they will ruin them. They will ruin whoever it is. And the reason they will ruin them is that the owner.
Trick question.
It is. It basically is, if they can draft an ownership who can get their coaching staff and their personnel department aligned, then there's probably 3 quarterbacks that are worth their time. And I'd say Josh Rosen is certainly one of them. Lamar Jackson is certainly one of them. And then I'm not so sure about to me, you could probably pick a few others, but those 2 guys kind of stick out for me as guys that, if this football team were actually a football team from an organizational standpoint, and not a complete utter joke, then yeah, this team might actually have a chance to make something good out of these 2 quarterbacks. But to me, ever since I don't know, for a while now, really, ever since they returned as that zombie team on Lake Erie, I would just say that I've kind of prayed that they didn't draft a quarterback for a while, until they've proven that they could do what they could with the players they had.
Yeah, it's I call it the Pet Cemetery effect. They don't come back right, and I still think that we need to do the Kickstarter, and the wheels are turning in my head right now, because what we can do with the Kickstarter, and to raise the money to buy this team, and Matt, you'll be the president of the team, and I suppose we could do some things where, like in a Kickstarter, if you donate $10,000, you can call an offensive play in the second half of the game of your choice. If you donate $20,000, maybe you get to call an entire drive.
Who started Wisdom of the Crowds for football guys?
I don't remember,
because they can be the president for that. I'm a dictator. I am not being a president. I'm just telling you right now. I'm being a dictator, and Browns fans would hate me for about 5 to 7 years. And when it works out well, I'm still leaving Cleveland, and then they can sit there and talk good about wishing I was still there, or they can hang my image in effigy after those 10 years, because I'm going to have a long reign until it finally works out, and they can whine about me forever at that point. But yeah, if you want wisdom of the crowds, you got to get somebody else. That ain't gonna be me.
And of course, we'll have Gene Bramwell, team doctor. Gene Bramwell, team doctor, a great matchup today. How wonderful is it that the Rams and the Saints are a matchup that we're excited about, but maybe not as excited about in terms of seeing the best players on these 2 teams. 2 players that have been a pleasant surprise. Robert Woods, first of all, and this one was quiet. He got injured late in the 4th quarter last week, Gene. There was some talk that it wasn't that severe, and then a few days later, he's going to miss a few weeks. Is Chris Hogan? What are we looking at now with Hogan? 1, 2, 3 games he's missed. As you said earlier, sometimes we hope these are 1-2 week injury, but it doesn't seem like that's the sign we're getting from the Rams on Robert Woods.
Yeah, same thing with Woods as with these other players this year, with Winston, with Hogan. They know more today than they knew on Monday or Tuesday. Hopefully this goes the way of Golden Tate rather than the way of Chris Hogan, but not really sure where it's going to progress. It wasn't obvious. All we know, the video wasn't obvious, but as soon as he hit the ground, he winced, which made you nervous for collarbone fractures and that sort of stuff. The fact that they've not ruled him out but for a couple of weeks pretty much rules that situation out. So it's hard to know whether or not it's one of those kind of sternoclavicular dislocations or whether or not it's a little bit further toward the outside of the shoulder. Those inside shoulder, the closer it is to the sternum, the more likely it is to be a 3 to 4 week situation. So that may be where it is. They knew that was the injury and wanted to follow it up a little bit with an MRI, and that is definitely going to be a 3 to 4 week deal. Or if it's a little bit closer outside the shoulder, it could take a little bit longer. But it's another situation where as the weeks go by, we'll know a little bit more information week to week. The Rams aren't very well covered at this point, and they're not giving out a lot of injury information. So we're just going to be sort of stuck hopeful for a major media report or something else to leak. So we'll have a sense of knowing where he is. I would sense that he's doubtful next week, and hopefully he'll be back for the playoff weeks.
And what about Marshon Lattimore? And we saw the Saints sign 2 corners this week. He was in a walking boot. We expecting this to be a multi-week injury for him?
It could be. Even when we say that the mechanism injury looks more low ankle sprain than high ankle sprain, that doesn't mean that those ligaments can't be disrupted so much to where there's too much pain and swelling and soreness to play, or there's a little bit of looseness in the joint if more than one of those ligaments on the outside of the ankle is affected. And if they put him in a walking boot, they wanted to mobilize to allow something to heal, and that suggests a little bit of a higher grade ligament injury. Should be easier for him to come back with this type of injury than a high ankle sprain, but we've seen players take 2 to 3 weeks. Emmanuel Sanders just this year. Take more than 1 week to come back from a low ankle sprain. So the walking boot doesn't scare me because it definitely looked ankle more than foot. If you hear walking boot and foot, it is a month-to-month situation. That wasn't the case with Lattimore. So hopefully they get both him and Crowley back next week.
So, again, the pieces come together. The forces converging, Matt. No Robert Woods. No Marshon Lattimore. And no Ken Crawley, right? Gene, the number 2 corner, also out for the Saints this week?
He's out, yep.
Yeah, so here we are. Remember that Saints defense week 1 against Sam Bradford. Now this week it's against Jared Goff. Jared Goff cleared for takeoff, but more than Jared Cooper Kupp cleared for takeoff. Sammy Watkins cleared for takeoff. But where I want you to start, because I think this could be one of those situations where it's an afterthought. We're in week 12. Bye weeks are over. You have a roster spot or 2 to play with. Tell people why Josh Reynolds is someone to consider adding to your lineup.
It could be. It could be him or it could be Mike Thomas. Either one. They're both guys who can get deep. They're both guys who can win the ball in the air. They're acrobatic. They're both decent after the catch. So they give you that, I guess, if you're looking for that guy who gives you that puncher's shot of a fantasy knockout, they're the guys with the big punch. So can they do enough otherwise to do more than that? That's the big question at this stage. Thomas has issues with dropping the ball. Reynolds only knows one position on the field at this point. So that's the risk with those guys. But yeah, I mean, if you're looking for something that might be, you're desperate at this stage, then yeah, sure. Desperate times call for desperate measures. These are those guys that you can consider from that stage on. But I think that, the combo of Kupp and Watkins and, probably Higbee and Gurley will be more than enough. And they'll be glad to take as many targets as they can get. And Goff is going to find them at will, I think, this week.
Yeah, this has all the makings of a 41-38 kind of game, assuming Drew Brees is dialed in. And the New Orleans defense last week, once they lost Marshon Lattimore, it was the house of cards. And there were Brian Grant and Chris Thompson and Jeremy Sprinkle even, catching touchdowns all by themselves on the screen. So I would guess
unless you have the Seahawks offense this week, I can't think of a better matchup to consider at this stage.
Yeah, and also New Orleans losing Alex Okafor, a pleasant surprise on a pass rush. So that one's waiting for us in the afternoon. Gene, we also have Seattle, San Francisco this afternoon. No Richard Sherman, no Cam Chancellor. At least we have Earl Thomas. Are we going to have Bobby Wagner?
I think so. Pete Carroll said that the team expected that to happen. I always get a little bit nervous when there's no practice during the week, and I felt like Bobby Wagner looked a little bit slow slower than usual last week too. He had a better second half than the first half, but he struggled a little bit. You couldn't really tell. He's been off and on the injury report with, I think it was a hamstring earlier in the year too. So I usually trust what Pete Carroll says. He's been relatively accurate all year long, but when a player doesn't practice, they're at least considering how he looks in pregame warm-ups. So there's a slight chance that he'll miss today, but hopefully Carroll's comments are going to be accurate.
Matt, when we're looking at Buffalo, Kansas City today, we've seen, I think it's clear that worse than Cleveland, Buffalo has been the worst team in the league the last 3 weeks, 32 out of 32, and there's a big gap from 31 to 32. Is that the Buffalo team we should expect when we're making decisions about the Chiefs and projecting, do I play Alex Smith or not? Do I play Tyreek Hill or not? Or is there a chance that Sean McDermott can get their attention? We saw the Giants come out of a similar tailspin. Which Bills team would you expect to see?
I think you're going to see the mediocre Bills team rather than the horrific Bills team. And that's just because they get Tyrod Taylor back as their starter, and this team's going to feel like they've got a fighting chance. Though at the same time, if things go south early, they're going to turn and look at their coach in disgust from the week before. So I think that there's a likelihood that this team's still kind of on a precariously balanced track. On the other end of the spectrum, though, I mean, I'd still start Alex Smith regardless, because that defense hasn't played well since the Darius trade, and Kareem Hunt should get healthy. So for those who've always thought that Kareem Hunt is a great back, well, he's going to give you great stats this week. I think he'll get back on that for you. Whether or not he is, I think is still debatable. But he's a good back, and he's going to make fantasy owners who've been neurotic about him over the past month feel a little bit better.
Gene, we took Danny Woodhead out for a short drive last week. No smoke coming out of the hood. The wheels stayed on. We're going to be able to take him off-roading tomorrow night against the Texans.
Yeah, don't go crazy. It's good that he's healthy. It's been a week now that he's been back to practice and doing football-related stuff. So you'd like to see him healthy for the rest of the season, but probably don't
the roll bar isn't on there to tighten up.
Yeah, careful.
Keep your seatbelt on. Fasten your seatbelts. It's fun. We always have fun with y'all every Sunday morning, week 12, and it should always be a fascinating week leading up to primetime Steelers. And we'll be back joining you all week, 8 episodes of the Audible Thursday night hangout, back after a week break for everybody to have a great Thanksgiving. We're thankful for you. We're thankful for the Football Guys community, and we appreciate you so much. You're the best always. We'll be seeing you around. Good luck this week, and stay classy.